Hi, that was my version of the classic Christmas song Blue Christmas, and it's quite an aptly titled piece of music to feature on a channel about blues guitar. But although it's titled Blue Christmas, it's not actually a piece of blues music, it's actually a piece of country music. Now, it was written by Billy Hayes and J.W. Johnson, and the first version was released in 1948 by country singer Doy Odell. But the song really became famous in 1964 when Elvis Presley released his version, and since then it has become one of the Christmas standard songs. So what I've done is written this fingerstyle blues version of it. Now I've just played through it, and what I want to do now is have a look at the song structure, then have a look at some playing tips and look at some of the things that might trip you up when trying to play it. And then lastly, what I'll do is I'll play through it again with the tempo a bit slower, and I'll put the tab on screen. Now, Blue Christmas is a fairly straightforward piece of music in the country style, and what I've wanted to do in my version is give it a slight bluesy twist to it while still retaining the character of the original, but also trying to make a version that's accessible and not too tricky to play. In terms of the structure, it's basically a 16 bar structure. So you have the 16 bar structure that plays through. It then plays through again, but the ending's slightly different, and that really is the most of the song. Now in Elvis's version, what it does is it plays the first 16 bar section, the second one, then repeats the second one with a bit of an instrumental in it, and then just repeats the last few bars. It's actually a really short song at just over 2 minutes in length. The structure of the version I've given you here is basically the first 16 bar section and the second 16 bar section. So within that you really have the whole song. Now the music, as is most country music, is in 4/4 time, and I've played it in the key of D because I think that's a good accessible key to play it in, and it also works well with the tuning I've got on this guitar, which is drop D tuning. And if you don't know how to tune your guitar to drop D, I do have a previous video. In terms of chords, it has the standard 3 chords you would expect to see in the key of D, which is D, G and A, and also their 7th equivalents, which is very common in country music. However, within this piece of music, it also adds a cheeky little E chord in that gets played for a few bars, and adding in this E chord to the standard 3 chords adds a nice bit of interest and variety into the music. Now the version I've done of it is a fingerstyle piece, so that's where you play the bass notes on the guitar with the thumb and pick out the melody with the other fingers on the higher string. And what I've done is adopt a Travis picking pattern for the majority of the music. There are some deviations from it, but mostly it adopts the standard Travis picking patterns either on strings 6 and 4 like this, or strings 5 and 4 like this. And that makes up the majority of the music. And I think a Travis picking pattern works well because Travis picking sounds good with country style music, and it also sounds good with blues style music. So I think it's an apt choice when I'm playing a piece of country music in a blues style. So that's an overview of the structure of the song. Now what I want to do is look at some of the trickier parts of the music that might trip you up and give you some tips on playing them. So what are some of the things that are likely to trip you up when playing this? Well, the main thing that's likely to trip you up is making the chord changes too late. Now when you're playing each section, you know, you're playing that Travis picking pattern and playing the melody notes, you will have an underlying chord that you're playing, and you will form all or part of that chord with your fret in hand when you're playing it. Now, the version I've written is I've taken a lot of the notes off the beat, so they're not landing on each beat of the bar, and this gives it a more bluesy feel to it. But what it also means is that the notes are occurring at the end of the previous bar before the chord change. And what you have to do is do that chord change at the end of the previous bar and not the start of the new one like you normally would. That may sound a bit odd or confusing. So the best thing I can do is give you some examples. So in bars 3 and 4 of the music, in bar 3 you're playing across a D chord, and in bar 4 you're changing an A chord, but the note that leads into this, which is played on the 2nd fret of the B string here, is actually the first note of the next bar. So you have to form that A chord at that note there, which is an 8th in from the previous bar. So I'll put the tab on screen. So what you would have was like that. So what you're doing is you're forming that A chord just at the end of the previous bar, so it's ready to get going into the next bar. And what the tendency is to just make the chord change at the start of the next bar. But what you'll find is if you do this is that it's too slow and you aren't able to get the notes or the bass notes out. So the best way to play it is put these chord changes in when the note that leads into them is played, which is usually at the end of the previous bar. What I'll do is I'll give you another example of this. So in bar 7 to 8 is another example. So what we're doing in this is going from an A7th chord into a D chord, and again the lead-in note, which is the 3rd note, 3rd fret on the B string, is played just at the end of the A bar, and thus you would be forming the D chord just at that point. So it goes like this. Now I'm playing it slightly slower there, so you may think you've got plenty of time, but if you're playing at a quicker tempo, you may not have enough time to form that chord at the start of the bar, so it's better to do it at that point. So the best thing to do is watch the next section of the video where I play through it slowly with the tab on screen and look at the fingerings that I do, and that'll give you an idea of when to change and when's the best time to change, so your fingers are in place for playing the next bar. Now, like I said, each bar will have an underlying chord that's played through it. And the best way usually when you're playing the Travis picking is to have all or part of that chord formed. Thus, when you're playing the Travis picking pattern, all the notes can ring out and you don't have to move your fingers around as much. But one thing I'll say is don't assume that you always have to form the full chord. Only form as much as you need to keep the finger work as efficient as possible. So an example of this would be in bar 6 and 7, where you're effectively forming an A7th chord. Now, you can form an A7th chord like this, or like this, and it's really this version that we're using here, where we've got the 3rd fret on the highest string getting played. But you don't have to form that whole chord. The only string you need lower down is this one here, so you can form this chord just by doing this. So like so. So don't always assume you have to form all the chords, because some of the chords that are used in this would be 4-finger chords like that A7th. And all you'll do is do unnecessary amounts of finger work and have more chance of making mistakes. So again, if you watch the next section of the video, look at my fingerings and they'll give you a guide to the most optimal fingerings for it. So when playing, don't always assume you have to use the full chord when playing the music. Just use as much as is necessary and try to keep your fingering to a minimum. Now, like I said, this is a fairly straightforward piece of music, so if you're comfortable playing fingerstyle guitar, then it shouldn't be too problematic. But like I say, with every piece of music, when you're learning it, start slow and build up the tempo, and it's probably the easiest way to learn it. If you're still having problems with some of the sections, what you can do is omit some of the notes and see how it sounds. So if there's a few notes that you're finding you're getting your fingers tangled up with, maybe try leaving them out and see how it sounds. Another thing you could do is rephrase them. Like I said, a lot of the melody notes are not on the beat of the bar and they're on the off beat, and this means you have to change chords at different times. So if there's some sections you're struggling with, try shifting the melody notes back onto the beat of the bar, and what this might do is make it slightly easier to play. It might lose some of that bluesy feel to it that it was trying to get, but if it gets you through the piece of music, then try that. So now what I want to do is just play through it a bit slower and put the tab on screen so you can play along it yourself.